of Child Development. Born and raised in London and currently living in Minneapolis, the very snowy Minneapolis, Minnesota, with her husband and children, Dr. Gewirtz has conducted research in the US, Asia, Middle East, and Africa. She has consulted for and presented to national and international, including US Congress and UNICEF. Thank you to the Jewish Federation of Greater Toledo and Foundation for supporting this event.
Thank you. Thanks, Andy. Thanks for having me. Thank you, Stephanie. And it's a treat to be with you. I understand that the weather in Toledo is a balmy 70-something, and here in Minneapolis it is 30-something, I think in the lower end of 30-something, and snowing. So I know some people are very happy about that, me not so much. So I'm here to sort of share a little bit about the book, When the World Feels Like a Scary Place. And I think that Andy has some questions for me, and I think you just want me to do a quick introduction, right, Andy? And so, for those of you who haven't had a chance to pick up the book is, here it is right here. The book is a book written for parents. I decided to write the book about 4 years ago, although quite a few people have asked me if I decided to write the book when the pandemic hit, because the world does feel a little bit like a scary place right now, or maybe not such a little bit. The world is more of a scary place right now, I think, than it has been, at least for many of us, in quite a long while. Back in 2016, I decided to write the book because although my own children were all had entered adolescence by then, I looked around and saw many of the parents of younger children who I knew really struggling with new issues to talk with their children about that they hadn't had to deal with before. If you'll remember, 2016, like 2020, was a pretty divisive election year. A year when people felt that it was going to be hard to sit around the Thanksgiving table, and what subjects should we avoid? There were a lot of contentious debates about immigration. There were a lot of contentious debates about other social justice issues. 2016 was also the year, I think, when we in schools began to establish lockdown drills as a routine. And for those of you who aren't familiar with lockdown drills, they prepare our sometimes very young children for the awful potential of a gunman coming into a classroom and shooting in the classroom. For the last about 10 years, I think, climate change and severe weather has become more and more of an issue, and more people around the US are being exposed to tornadoes and floods and fires and elements, severe weather that we were not used to, at least on this scale, before then. And then, of course, there's these wonderful devices, right? How many of you don't have a cell phone to hand? And I wonder if you know the age at which the average American child gets a cell phone. Well, because we're not sitting in a circle in one room and where you could shout out, I'll just tell you, it's 10 years old. The average American child gets a cell phone at the age of 10. And then it's really hard for parents to stop the world coming in. And so I decided to write a book to help parents have these difficult conversations with their children, whether they be about violence. I didn't even talk about hate crimes. Hate crimes, and particularly anti-Semitism, has increased year on year over the last more than 5 years. And of course, it's not just anti-Semitic hate crimes, it's hate crimes across the board. So how do we talk to our children about these difficult world events? I spend about the first third of the book providing parents with tools and strategies to help them, parents, adults, think through these scary world events. Because often what happens is that inadvertently or mistakenly, just because these events affect us, our own feelings about things and our own big feelings about things spill over into our interactions with our kids. And so if you feel very upset about something, and your children, all of you who've had children or have children or love children, know that our children are extremely good detectives. They know exactly what's going on with us, and they see us get upset and they learn something. And so when we're upset about something that we need to talk to our children about, the idea of, you know, what I say in the book is, put your own mask on before assisting others, which means if we are upset and we sit down with our children, then what's going to emerge is a conversation about us, not a conversation about them. And we need to now, when the world feels so chaotic, people feel so helpless, there is real danger. Many people are experiencing great adversity, whether it's worry and loss around the coronavirus pandemic, whether it's concerns about keeping a job, the economy, school, how parents are going to juggle having kids who are going to school from home and also being full-time parents and also being full-time employees. These are really, really stressful times. So that's a little bit about the book. And Andy, I don't know if you want to steer the conversation in one way or another, but the floor is yours.
Thank you. In your book, you use role playing, where you offer a lot of different scenarios on how to handle situations, everything from preschoolers all the way up to teenagers dealing with their problems. Do you find that role playing, you give multiple scenarios throughout, because I find that it never goes as I think it will. Do you find role playing the most effective way to communicate with your children?
So in the book, as you point out, there are what, 30 something conversations which look like a sort of a role play, because they have, you know, mom, dad, child, and then, by the way, when we do our parenting program, we do exactly that. We do a red light, and then we do a green light. And a red light conversation is the conversation you wish afterwards you could have rewound. You know, it's the conversation that happens when you just didn't take a breath before the difficult thing happened and you had to sit down with your child. And then what came out was something that you wish you could draw, you know, sort of go back on. I love role play. Role play, by the way, and I'm not advocating role play between parents and kids. I'm sort of more, it would be between you and your co-partner or co-parent or spouse. The best way to change what we do is to practice. It's the only way to change what we do, right? We might say, like, think about it, right? I'm going to go to the gym from now on, right? If you don't go to the gym, you know, I'm going to get fit. But if you don't actually do the thing, right, if you don't engage in the behavior, you won't be able to change. And parenting is a really tough job. And so actually, when we deliver our parenting programs, the ones that I've sort of spent the last 15 years doing research on and developing, we find that the best way for people to learn is to practice and role play. So you can talk. You know, people, if you ask them, like, do you like to role play? No one says yes. Everyone says no. I'd rather discuss it. But, you know, behavior change doesn't usually come about following discussion. It's usually when you jump in there and you think about what could this be like? By the way, it's not that I don't ever role play with my children. I actually do. Like when they're encountering difficult situations, like you have a conflict on the playground, or you need to talk to a teacher about something and you're anxious about it, then having a brainstorm about potential ways that the meeting could go and what your child could do to manage potential conflict. Role-playing is a beautiful way to do it. But in the book, it's all about the sort of role play between parents to prepare for sitting down with your child.
Can I ask real quick, because you had mentioned, and you initially had mentioned about how, you know, there was that whole reeling back and wish you could take back some of that stuff. What can parents do before, you know, to kind of help control those negative emotions? Or what are some tips for before we get, you know, before we talk to our child to kind of calm down, or what are some tips for that?
Right. Great question, Stephanie. Thank you. So really the front part of the book is on that, because if I can't deal with the emotions that come flooding at me, it's going to be very hard to teach my children in the right way to coach their emotions. So this is all about what we call emotion coaching. And so I encourage parents to think about, what kind of a person are you? What are your sensitivities? What's your history? What's your style? Some of us are just, we're pretty mellow people, right? Not much bothers us. Others of us are more sensitive and lots of things bug us. In other cases, I might have a particular sensitivity towards something that happened in my past, but my spouse doesn't have that. So when we're going to have a conversation that might hit on my sensitivity, I'm going to let him take the lead. The issue, though, at its core, so that's sort of the backdrop, like what kind of a person are we? What's our temperament? What are the things that bug us? Who might be the better person to engage in a conversation? But the thing about putting your own mask on before assisting others is, and let me take an example, right? That's very relevant. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and a lot of people are very worried. And let's say I went to work. I have permission to return to work. There are very few people on my floor, and I'm very diligent about wearing a mask. And I come into work one day, and there's someone there who's not wearing a mask. And I'm in a closed environment, and I might even ask the person to put on a mask, and he or she refuses. And I finish my work and I go home, and I am so mad and also very, very worried. And I just burst into the house. My husband's there, and I just say, "You will not believe it. So-and-so, I was so stressed at work. There I was. We don't have a big office, and so-and-so wasn't wearing a mask, and I'm just furious." And my child comes in, and I say, "Can you believe it, Maddie? Like, so-and-so wasn't wearing a mask, and you must always wear a mask, and you must always make sure," right? You can see where this is going. And Maddie, your 12-year-old, says, "Oh, Mom, you're so intolerant," and blah, 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 blah. And before you know it, you're in a fight. What is the fight even about? On the other hand, I could have, my anger and my worry about the person who's in my space and not wearing a mask is real. We can't stop our emotions. We really can't control emotions coming at us. But what we can do is we can make a space between the emotion flooding in and our behavior. And that's the goal here, is to recognize, wow, my heart is beating fast. I am really anxious, and I am also really angry. I can feel myself tensing up. I get in the car and I take a few deep breaths, and I say, I'm going to drive the long way home because I just need a few more minutes to let off steam before I walk into the house. Because if I walk into the house in this way, I'm going to let my emotions bowl me over, and before I know it, there's going to be something unpleasant that's going to happen. And so the strategies that you use, I give some strategies like in the moment, but I think everyone has their go-to strategies. In the moment, what can you do? You can always take a breath. And what I recommend is like 5 breaths in, 10 breaths out. It's great for sort of your heart rate variability. You can say to your child, if your child sort of runs in, slams the door, and is very upset, and you have a reaction, you can say, "Hey, take a seat. Let me grab a glass of water." And in that moment, you can have your back to your child. You can raise your eyebrows. You can feel your feet on the floor, and you can take a breath. Sometimes you might have 3 minutes to just walk outside the door and take a breath of fresh air, or remind yourself where you are, or put yourself in the other person's shoes, or use humor, like a joke, as long as it's a good humor joke and not a sarcastic joke, really goes a long way to diffusing your own and others' tension. So there, and in the longer term, strategies, and I could ask all of you to write down the strategies you use. Everyone has their go-to. It could be, some people pray, some people meditate, some people do yoga, some people go running, some people swim. Anything, many people go for a walk. Anything that helps you feel in the short and longer term like you have tools.
You suggest active listening as the main parenting skill, and it's one that I think most parents are lacking. How can we be better listeners to our children when they talk at us all day, or we have teenagers who just don't ever stop?
Some don't ever stop, some won't talk to you at all, right?
Yes.
It's really variable. Yeah, active listening is, I would say, it's not the main skill, it's a component skill. And it's, so, you know, I talk about in the first half of the book, after talking about emotions, I sort of provide the building blocks of the essential conversation. And as you pointed out, Andy, one of the key building blocks is active listening. So let me sort of build up to it so that you can see where active listening comes in, and then and then why listening is so important, and it's something that we find so hard to do for good reasons, as you pointed out. So let's say what do you want to pick a child age? I'm going to create a scenario with a kid. Name the age.
17.
A 17. Oh, we're really getting into the adolescent thing here. So your 17-year-old comes into the house and you can tell something is wrong, and you don't exactly know what, but she has that like face, and she may be unusually doesn't want to, you know, is quiet, and you might say, Andy, and you might be irritated because she slammed the door. And so the first thing you want to do is take that good old deep breath and remember that she doesn't usually slam the door and she's looking down, so something might be up. And so you say, Andy, I can see that you're looking pretty upset, and I can see like you're looking down and your brow is furrowed. Are you worried about something? Are you angry? What are you feeling right now? And she might say, nothing. Or she might say, yeah, I'm so mad. And that's your cue, right? You're so mad. Oh, okay. Hey, come sit down. Let me grab you a cookie and a cup of water, because looks like you've had a long day. Come in, let's see. So I know that when I get angry, wow, I get like hot and red and flushed, and you're looking a little flushed yourself. And I know sometimes like I get a feeling in the pit of my stomach. Is that how you're feeling right now? And that is called labeling and identifying the emotion. So why am I doing that? Because I want her to understand that the emotion that she is displaying is a very important signal. Emotions are to be well tended and nurtured, rather than dismissed, which is easy for us to do, especially when we're feeling impatient towards our kids, and especially with adolescents, right? Why did you slam the door? I'm so angry. You're always angry, that kind of thing. Like it's a very common experience. But we want to model that emotions are very important signals, and particularly so, so let's carry on that scenario. She sits down and you say, what happened? And she says, well, I am so mad. Jamie came to school and her mom has the virus, and she came to school anyway. And now they're probably going to shut the school down, and we're not even going to do hybrid anymore. And what if we all get the virus, right? And so you say, so this is your opportunity to validate. Wow, no wonder you're feeling angry. I would feel angry if that happened to me too. And I might feel other stuff as well. Do you have any other feelings? Like, well, do you think we'll get the virus? So you must be worried as well. And I would be worried too if I were you. And I remember when, my friend got really sick when we were kids, and it was a contagious illness, and I was scared for her, but I was also scared for me too. So let's talk about it. So then what you've done is you've not only labeled and identified her emotion, but you've also validated her emotion. And that's really important because it lets her know that you respect it, and it's a real concern, and you're not just going to dismiss it. And this is when you come in and you have the chance to listen. And so meantime, you're there's a knot in the pit of your stomach as well, because you think, egads, oh my goodness, her friend has the virus and her friend's mom has the virus. Oh, and we know what the rates of the virus are today. Oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And my mom is older and immunocompromised, and we've been seeing her, she's been in our bubble, what do we do? And that could drive the conversation, right? You could easily jump to the, oh, I think you should go, maybe you should live in the basement. You know, before you've had a chance to listen. And of course you can imagine how well that's going to go. But you hold on and you take a breath and you just say, Andy, tell me everything that happened. And this is when we often make the assumption that what she's worried about is she's mad and she's worried and that's it. But when you listen, you have the opportunity to hear all the other stuff that you probably wouldn't hear unless you invited it. There's more in the conversation, but I'm going to throw it back to you, Andy. Yeah.
I'd like to go to the other end of the spectrum, to the younger kids. There was a question asked, how do you relate with the younger kids from the preschoolers up through the elementary kids? How do you relate to the world right now with what's going on? And how do we deal with health issues with their grandparents and their older generation that, you know, they really haven't been through these experiences before?
Right. So that's a great question. So we, you know, Andy was 17 and 17-year-olds understand pretty much everything. I mean, they may not behave in a way the same way that adults do, but they understand. I think the difficulty is when you have a 7-year-old or a 5-year-old or a 3-year-old who can't see their grandparents, who whose parents have to explain why you have to wear a mask. That is a really difficult thing. So the harder thing with younger children is, and so let's take a 4-year-old. Okay, and let's do this. I always believe in show rather than tell. And let's say we have a 4-year-old who was going to preschool and we have the same situation. Okay, or maybe we'll have a slightly different situation. Your daughter's friend, her grandmother is sick with the coronavirus. And you actually hear this not from your 4-year-old, but you hear it from your 4-year-old's friend's mom. And so the risk isn't like, you know, the 4-year-old's going to get it, but you haven't had to explain to your child. You've talked in theory about the virus. You've maybe, you know, most parents, I think, have explained that there's an illness that means that we have to wear masks because we don't want to get it, and we certainly don't want to spread it to people who we love, especially people who are already not so well or are older because they can't fight it so well. And that's a pretty standard way of sort of chatting with your younger child. But you've never had to talk about someone who's really been sick and in the hospital. And so with a 4-year-old, what you want to do is think before the conversation about what you're willing to share. Okay, your 4-year-old hasn't been the one to share this with you, but you know that she knows. So you might want to start by saying, honey, I heard from Stephanie's mom that her grandma's not well, she's in the hospital, and I know that Stephanie told you about it. And what did you hear? What are you wondering about? And your 4-year-old will let you know, whether she'll let you know verbally or in her play. She's going to let you know what's worrying her. And she might, and you can say you can ask me any questions you want, and you want to listen really carefully to what her questions are. And she might say, is Stephanie's grandma going to be okay? And what are they going to do in the hospital? And can Stephanie go visit her? And what about my grandma? Mom, is she going to be okay? And these are all the things that if we don't take the time to listen, we aren't going to hear. And sometimes we don't necessarily want to hear those questions because they scare us too, right? And I think the thing about the pandemic is that it brings up issues of life and death in a way that most people don't have to contend with on a day-to-day basis. And it's very, very scary for us. And if it's scary for us, you can bet your bottom dollar it's scary for our kids as well. And I just want to say one more thing about this, which is, because I really want to make sure that you understand that the conversations do not end with your child, with the listening and your child telling you. There is a way to wrap these conversations up that I think is really, really crucially important. That the conversations are not just about listening, validating your child's fears, labeling them. They are also about helping your child deal with her fears and her big emotions, and also to problem solve actual difficult situations in a way that helps your child feel empowered and able to do something. And so for the example where, you know, your daughter's friend Stephanie's grandma is sick, you want to help your child feel better. And so you're going to strategize. You're going to say, well, now we're going to brainstorm. What we're going to do is we're going to brainstorm ways to help you feel better, feel less worried about Stephanie. So what are the ways I can help you feel less worried about Stephanie? And I'm not going to tell you, you and I are both going to share ideas. So here's one idea. We could FaceTime Stephanie and her mom and see how they're doing. And then your daughter might say, and we could make a card for her grandma. And then you might say, and you know what else we could do? I know you love your stress ball, and I wonder if it would help you to take your stress ball to school tomorrow. And then your child might say something like, oh, and maybe we could go visit Stephanie's grandma. You know you can't, but you're not going to stop her there. You're going to wait till the end of the conversation when you're going to get all the ideas and you're going to distill them, and you're going to make sure that some of her ideas are also in the outcome, because that way your child sees, however young she is, that she has a part in the solution. And at a time when people are feeling so disempowered and that it feels like there's so much chaos and there's so much helplessness, I think that is a really important lesson for our children, that there are always things they can do.
So you mentioned the young ones and you mentioned the older ones, but the tween girls, boys who know everything and but are still very much young children, if they don't communicate with you, how do you help them process through?
Yeah, you know, I love that. I have a wooden plaque in my kitchen that I took from my mother when I became a parent of a teenager, and it says, hire a teenager while they still know everything. So it's hard with the tweens and the early teens, let's say kids from about 10 to 13, 14. They think they know everything. They don't want your help. They, you know, and so the question, Andy, was how do you get started talking about this? Yeah. And
when they won't communicate with you, how do you communicate when they shut down?
Yeah, so which I think is pretty common, and so I want to reassure anyone who's feeling that it's not uncommon. You know, the job of kids, you know, as they become teenagers, as they enter puberty, their job is to like become their own person, and so some kids, they just don't want anything to do with their parents. And by the way, what a tough time this is. You know, you're at an age where the last thing you want to do is be with your parents, and the thing that's most important to you is to be with your friend, and you can't be with your friends, and you are stuck with your parents all the time. So I make a couple of suggestions in the book. I think one thing is not to force kids to talk at all. Like I think that it's really, and I say this in the book, it's really hard for kids when parents go, talk to me. Because they can feel really intruded upon, like, you know, like, hey, are you looking into my soul? Like, go away, mom, like, give me my space. So don't try not to sort of intrude on them and challenge them, and do it on their terms rather than on yours. Like, and it can be tricky because in my experience, having been the mother of 4 teenagers, fortunately 2 of them have made it into their 20s, yay. But there can be a very narrow window of time in a day where your child is willing to talk with you. And sometimes it's like that little sliver of time when they just get home from school. Of course, no one's going to school now, or not much, or it could be like the little sliver of time over dinner. So follow their lead, do it on their terms. And then the other thing, the other opportunity you have, and by the way, when you need to have a conversation with them, don't feel it has to be face to face. I think some of the best conversations can be had in the car. You're in the front seat, they're in the back seat. No one has to look at each other. Even when you're walking the dog, right? When you're walking along, you're side by side, you don't have to look at each other. So those, I think, are great opportunities. You know, they're great spaces to have conversations that could be embarrassing for your child to keep eye contact with. The other thing is modeling conversations between you and your partner or spouse. So for example, I hope you will have the opportunity to have at least a dinner together. And at dinner, that's a great time for conversation. And if you can see that your child is dealing with something that they don't want to talk about, you and your spouse can discuss not your child's issue, but something parallel in the grown-up world, right? Let's say it's a friend issue, right? You could have a conversation. Hey, honey, I heard that you got left out of that. Like, you know, I remember you told me about that meeting that you weren't invited to. You must have felt pretty upset about that, right? And then, you know, and if it can, you know, hopefully it can be a genuine conversation. Yeah, I was really like, I was mad, but I was also, I thought, did I do something wrong? Is it something about me? Do I smell? You know, like, why was I excluded? And then you can go through the whole conversation with your spouse, like, you know, your spouse telling you, validating the feelings, and then even towards the resolution, like you could model this conversation. I wonder if you tried, I wonder what you know, how did you deal with it? Well, you know, I talked about it with another colleague and we figured, why don't I just go to the boss and say, you know, I was curious that you didn't invite me. And then he said, oh gosh, so sorry, I just forgot. Or, you know, I was going to invite you, but then so-and-so said you had a deadline for today. And honestly, it was nothing except that we were worried about your workload. Oh, you know, so these are great things that you can model for your child. I think especially the feelings discussions. Modeling, you know, I'm feeling really stressed. I'm feeling really worried. I have to give this big presentation tomorrow. It's on Zoom. Our internet's not been great. Oh, honey, you know, I haven't seen you anxious like this for a while. How does it feel? Well, I have this, like, I have that, those butterflies in my stomach. And I just, you know, that kind of thing. So that sort of thing is, I think, can work really well for young teens.
Bullying is an issue that we've all dealt with all our lives, but with online schooling and all the social media these days, bullying has really changed. And it's becoming, especially kids with phones at such a young age. How do we help them handle the bullying that's going on?
I think that's a great question. And you know, in the violence chapter of the book, I talk about bullying, and particularly in social media. I mean, there are a number of examples. One is bullying at school. Another one is a young girl, and I wish I didn't have to put this in the book. I really do. But I mean, this is a real scenario, a young girl who sees her boyfriend and his friends plotting to encourage, and they actually do through hateful messages, a kid to hurt himself, you know? And we've all seen these awful publicized examples of kids goading other kids either to do awful things to someone else or to themselves on social media. And the problem, I think, with social media is, take Snapchat, for example, the messages disappear. There is no way to effectively monitor your child on some kinds of social media. And so I really, you know, it really does require conversations. And, you know, before you have those conversations, it really requires parents to think through what their values are. And I write in the book, I'm not going to tell you what to say to your child, because that's going to be a reflection of your own values. You know, when you buy your child a phone, what you allow your child to do on the phone, if you require your child to put the phone away for the night, if you put limits on what or how long or with whom he's going to engage on social media or in technology. Those are all decisions that should be driven by parents' values. And at the beginning of the book, I have a whole exercise on values I'm not going to give away, but it's my favorite. But those parents who've had conversations with their children, and these essential conversations, they're not one-offs, right? You don't have one conversation about bullying. These are ongoing conversations. But I think parents who've had conversations like these are in a much better situation to address bullying. And bullying, of course, you know, it goes two ways, right? There are children who are being bullied, and there are children who are engaging in bullying, both directly and indirectly as bystanders. Those, you know, all these things are all meshed together, and they're also, you know, they're also inextricably linked to friends, right? And what people think of, you know, if you're my friend, you'll do this, right? And so it's a really, really difficult issue, but it's an issue that parents have to talk about. And it could be as something as benign as, let's, you know, I heard from, so one of the vignettes, one of the conversations in the book is about a mother who hears from another mother that there are compromising photos of her daughter on social media. And it turns out that her daughter broke up with her the daughter broke up with her boyfriend. She's only 12 years old. And the boyfriend posted, you know, not horrendous, like we're not talking naked photos, but skimpy photos. And the mom jumps immediately to sort of catastrophizing. And when she does that, her emotions get the better of her, and she lays into, how could you share these photos? How could you, you know? And of course, the daughter's so upset. You can bet she'll not want to go and talk to her mother again about this kind of issue. So again, let's go back to, can we have a conversation that is truly an essential conversation in which I do less of the overreacting or impulsive reacting and more of the intentional responding, allow my child to talk, and then problem solve together, right? Because our children, even with issues like bullying, our children have many of the answers if we give them the space and the empowerment to be able to address those. And then many people, you know, sort of convey that there are many people around them, not just their parents, but their teachers and other people at school who have their back and want to help them.
So kind of going back to the modeling conversations and everything, sometimes, like, for different reasons, you know, you don't always have that co-parent around. You don't have somebody else to, you know, set the example or model the conversations or discuss issues with. So how do you suggest handling issues when this is the case, when you don't have that other person to kind of bounce things off of?
Right, that's a great question. I'm really glad you asked it, Stephanie. In the book, I have a lot of discussions with single parents, mom, child, dad, child, as well as with two-parent families, and sometimes with grandparents as well. I think the thing to remember, and single parents have it tough anyway, because parenting is the hardest thing. I believe it's the hardest job in the world. I believe if you ask Barack Obama or another person who was in the White House with young children, they would also say that parenting is the hardest thing in the world. You know, and if you're doing it alone, it's harder, right? For sure. I think the big thing to remember, I'm going to say this for everyone, I don't think it's just for single parents, is you have to be able to have enough reserves to be able to have a conversation. So a question to ask, have I refueled myself enough to be able to give this conversation what it takes? And that requires us to be able to say, I'm really tired right now. I'm exhausted. I've had a really tough day, and I can't have this conversation now. You don't need to say that out loud to your child. It's for yourself. And I'm going to forgive myself that. And I'm going to take some time to refuel. And by the way, the refueling can happen in the moment too. It's perfectly acceptable if your child comes in crying and wants to talk with you right now. It's absolutely acceptable to say, honey, you look really sad. Wow, I really want to hear about it. I'm just doing something right now. I'm going to get you a cup of water and a cookie, and I'm going to give me 5 minutes, and I'm go 10 minutes, or how about we talk about this after dinner or over dinner or whatever it is. I think we can't show compassion and forgiveness to our children if we can't do that ourselves. And so that, again, going back to, we have to start with ourselves. So I think if you're a single parent doing this and you don't have someone else for sensitive conversations, or if you're not on the same page as your co-parent, right? So there are parents who are divorced and who are totally on the same page when it comes to parenting. And I've seen parents who come together for their kids and they'll have these conversations together, even though they are, they live separately, they're divorced. If you're truly on your own, it can be really, really hard. Think through, again, same as with two parents, but think through, like, what are my sensitivities? What's gonna press my buttons in this conversation, and what am I gonna do if that happens? And you can even set the rules ahead of time with your child and say, let's talk about this now. Let's say something happened with your child. Let's say it was bullying, and your child wants to discuss it, and you know that you are incredibly sensitive because you were bullied as a child. And in that case, it's okay to say to your child, I'm feeling really sad for you right now. I'm feeling really sad because I remember when I was a child, that was really tough for me. And so if I feel sad, I am going to just take a few minutes, because this is about you. And I want this conversation is about you. And so, but I might need to take a little break. Okay. So you just be really upfront and honest so that you're not pretending that you're not feeling something that you are feeling.
So say in the past, I'm a parent who has screamed and yelled and slammed doors and not been an active listener. And my
that would be all of us. That would be almost all of us.
Yes. So how do I help my child understand that I'm trying to listen? If you have a child who immediately throws up walls and won't let you in, how do you help to change that when you've already done everything you're not supposed to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, none of us is perfect. And thank goodness for that, because otherwise people like me would be out of work. Just saying. But I think one of the things about kids is, thank goodness, and people in general, but our children in particular, is that they are pretty forgiving. They might remind you of the things that certainly my kids are like that. They might remind you of the bad things. Do you remember when you did? You just have to take it with a pinch of salt. Yes, I am such a bad parent, or whatever, and sometimes I'll say to my kids, we tried our best. We're working hard as we can. And sometimes it doesn't work out. And I think also just apologizing and saying, I'm sorry that didn't come out the way I meant it to come out. Like, can we do a do-over? That's really the red light, green light transition, is like the do-over. And just, asking for forgiveness like we would with anyone else, right? We want our kids respect. We don't want our kids fear, right? We want their respect. And we want them to feel that they can bring stuff to us, because I've never met a parent who doesn't want, who would rather someone else talk about those really important things. And I think that does require us to say, you know what, I was so upset when I heard you say that. And I reacted, and I didn't take the time. I should have said, give me 5 minutes. I need to take some deep breaths, and I didn't. And that's why I yelled, or I slammed the door. And can we do it again? I'm sorry. And I think that, depending on it, some kids are really sensitive, some kids are less sensitive, some kids are more willing to forgive quicker, others not. I find that, like, the offer of a snack, or listening to them telling you incessantly about their day, or an offer of a shared TV show is, a nice way to make it up.
I have a comment from Susan. She says, thank you for having the vision to write your book. I plan to use it with a resiliency project being worked on. There will be gaps in students' education, and teachers will need to be aware of the situation and plan to address it for several years. Parents will need to help also. There will be a gap in students' education. I have a senior who is not having a senior year, and I work with preschoolers who are not necessarily getting, the kindergartens, first graders are not getting what they should be getting. Do you foresee a problem with these children in the future?
Yeah, I too have a senior in school. It's a tough time to be a senior, and I have a freshman in college as well. It's and two in their 20s. Fortunately, they're doing okay. You know, I mean, they're all doing okay. But you know, and I'm so grateful, right? I think it's interesting. We haven't talked about gratitude, but I think in the midst of this really difficult time, there's gratitude in all sorts of places. There's terrible hardship, and I think there's people are appreciating things that they may not have appreciated previously. I am worried about kids, and I think everyone who's a teacher, and Susan, that's really such a, thank you. That's a really powerful sort of statement. I tell you what I'm worried about. I'm worried about worry, right? So anxiety is my thing. You know, I've worked in, my research is in traumatic stress and the impact of trauma on families. I've been doing that work for over 20 years. And what I worry about is that when you have kids who are already somewhat anxious, right, which is, you know, a fair number of kids, and we've seen, pandemic aside, anxiety and depression increase over the last 10 years, not just in America. The book was published by a publisher in the United Kingdom. I wrote an introduction, and I looked at the stats in England, and it was the same. I think all over we are seeing increases in children's anxiety and depression for a variety of reasons, not only the fact that technology is sort of intrudes and tells them way too much. And so I worry when you have someone who's anxious, the only way really to deal with anxiety is for them to go do the thing that they worry about, right? The problem is with the pandemic, and so let's take a kid who's a little bit cautious about school, doesn't love school. Pandemic was perfect for them, in theory, because they didn't have to go to school. What happens when we fear things and we're able to avoid them is that the avoidance is very reinforcing. And so we feel better and better about being able to stay at home. And when we have to go back into the world, I worry about what it's going to be like for those kids. And I worry in general about a generation of kids who are learning that outside the home is a scary place. It's so scary that you have to wear a mask every time you go out. And you can't trust the insides of a restaurant or a store or whatever it is. And the only real safe place is home. And the reason I worry about that is because in America, we value independence and freedom to be out, you know, community. And we want to bring children up who are independent and compassionate and engaged in their community and who go out into the world. And I think that I hope that in classrooms over the next few years, we can encourage that the world is, the world is overwhelmingly a safe place, and helping children to feel empowered and not scared to go out and do good things.
I have a question. Sue asked, what about talking to children who are anxious about you or anxious about things that are going on with you and the other parent?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and that sort of gets to the inside the house, right? Like in the book, I really talk about, when the world outside the home feels like a scary place. I think there are all sorts of situations in which right now it can be tough inside the home. We are seeing, and I know, Susan, this isn't what you're necessarily asking about, but I've been talking with a number of people about things like rates of domestic violence are going up. And I have no doubt that we will see rates of child abuse and neglect going up as well, because families are so stressed and they have so few resources, and all the resources, the in-person resources that help parents de-stress, like childcare and, daycare and school and even, sports and after school enrichment are not available, or are much less available. And so it's incredibly stressful. And we know that when stress increases and resources diminish, we see things like more conflict in homes, more domestic violence, and more child abuse and neglect. I think it's a whole different story talking to your child who is anxious about things that are like that. It's a bigger discussion than a sort of the 5 minutes we have left. However, if you're talking about sort of the more benign, like just disagreements between parents. I mean, I was telling these guys before we started that I was on with a group in Columbus, Ohio last night. It was lovely. And one of the parents had a question about, my child is really a sensitive child and I'm trying to work with her. And my partner just said to my child, "You have issues." And like, really? Now what? So I think, and I discuss this in the book, parents have different approaches. We come from different backgrounds with different understandings of things like mental health and anxiety and different tolerances and different levels of patience. And I think it's okay to talk about that with your kids, and you can apologize or you don't have to apologize, right? We're different, mom and dad, right? That's why when I say no, you go to him and he sometimes says yes, right? And we wish we knew you were going to go to both of us so we could get ourselves on the same page, right? So I think being, I would say the conversations would follow the same steps as an essential conversation. So your child says to you, "Mommy, I don't understand. I got really sad because I could hear you and Daddy arguing last night," for example. Same, wow, I thank you for telling me that. I'm glad that you were able to tell me that. Daddy and me want to know when you feel sad. And I would feel sad too if I heard two people that I loved arguing with each other, right? And then red light would be, "But we still love each other. Don't worry about it," right? That's what we want to say. And green light would be, "Let's sit down and I want to hear tell me what you were thinking and what you're feeling. And then let's figure out a way, you and me and Daddy, let's talk about it, the three of us. And let's figure out a way to help you feel better about this." And in that conversation can be that, by the way, we love each other, right? But I think, again, empowering your child to sort of come up with solutions to let you know when she's feeling unsettled or unhappy, and ways that she can talk to you about it so that she can feel better and things like that.
I have just one last question. In the book, you talk about the difference between a child being safe and a child feeling safe. And as a parent, I'm embarrassed to say it didn't occur to me that there was a difference, that they would not, I keep them safe, so therefore they should feel safe. How can we help them feel safe when as parents we're still trying to set up boundaries and I'm not trying to be their friend?
Yeah, and I think also when we don't feel safe, right? I think that's the ultimate challenge. How can we help our children feel safe in a world in which we don't feel safe, right? So yes, I think most of us make the assumption that if we, that being safe is the same as feeling safe. And I think too often in our world, we may be safe but not feel safe. Sometimes we may feel safe when we're not actually safe, but we're not, most of those, I think that's less usual, fortunately, right? We're not living in a war-torn society. We're living in a place where most people have basic needs, although an increasing number don't, things like that. But mostly I think the book is talking about families who may be safe but not feel safe. I think that's the hardest thing in the world right now, which is that we ourselves feel buffeted by the winds outside. I don't know about you, my husband listens to the radio and television far too much. And that's a way not to feel so safe. And when we feel that the world is in chaos, as we did, certainly, I mean, people talk about the new normal, but I think all the way through the coronavirus, when it started, what is this? What should we be doing? What shouldn't we be doing? Where could we go? Where can't we go? Is it safe to do this? Is it not safe to do this? And then there was the whole school, how safe is school? And should we, and mask mandates and everything, right? I got a question from a mom early on, I think it was back in June. The world is in chaos. My kids are at home. There's no more school. There's nothing to get up for in the morning. Why would I even bother setting them a bedtime? Shouldn't I just let it go? And actually, maybe counterintuitively, what I said was, actually, this is the time where what you need to do is to help your children feel safe. You need to put all the boundaries and the limits and the structure of the world that you would normally do. You have that. They really need that, because your kids need to feel safe. And the way they feel safe is by knowing that their mom and dad have the rules, are setting the limits, know what's going on, love them deeply, and are doing their best to care for them. And those kinds of things like bedtimes and meal times together and same routine, even though we might not get in the car or go on the bus, those kinds of things. And it doesn't have to be the same routine, but a routine tells your child that the world is predictable. And now it feels, for us, it feels anything but predictable, but your child still needs the predictability and the routine. We're creatures of habit. And we, you know, if we think about the fact that we feel that life is in chaos or helpless, our children in reality don't have any control. I mean, we have some control over our lives, right? We may not feel we do. We have some control. They have no control. And so to the extent that we can give them the control or the knowledge that this is going to happen, you know, so I would say before September came, my, you know, parents would say, my kid keeps saying, when are we going to go back to school? And I keep saying, I have no idea. And I say, well, you know what? You could say to your child, we don't know right now whether you're going to be in the school building, but you will be in 3rd grade and your teacher is going to be Mrs. Smith. So what certainty can you give them? I would focus on that.
Thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed your book, and Stephanie is going to do the wrap up for me.
Thank you.
So I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I know Andy and I did, and that you got a lot out of it. And I think a lot of it is, we're not perfect as parents. We just need to just take a breath, just kind of stop, you know, take a step back and realize, you know, we're all doing the best we can, and we'll get through toddler, tween, teen. We'll make it through it. So I'd like to give a warm thank you to Abigail, Dr. Abby, for joining us. So if everybody wants to wave, clap, and, you know, thank you for joining us this afternoon. Her book is available online. I posted the link to Barnes & Noble. It is available at the Monroe Street store, so you can do curbside pickup. You can stop in and get it. Visit our book festival table they have set up there. Dr. Abby's website is also in the chat box, so you can get more information. I've seen her all over Facebook, so she's out and about talking about this book. So we're very lucky to have her this afternoon. So thank you, Abby, Dr. Abby, for joining us.
Well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure, and stay safe and well, everybody.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.